Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm your host, Shayna James, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about growing older, times changing, the fact that we may not actually know who we are as times change, our body changes, our desires change, our values change. Um, and then what do we do with that? Especially as men, I think there is a way that men are taught to be solid, know who you are and stand for who you are. And then that can be a very um, confusing experience, as times change. So I'm here today with Randy Spelling, a professional life coach and colleague and friend. And I'm so excited to have you here today to talk about this because I think the world is changing so fast. Not only are we getting older, but it's like paradigms are just melting moment by moment.
Things are changing so quickly.
Yeah.
It's head spinning. And by the way, it's good to see you. It's so good to be here. We've been talking about this for a little while. So happy to be here with you and share a little bit of time and space as we could dig in.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So maybe we start with what are you finding, right? As you have become a parent, as your kids, I mean, even becoming a parent is different than then going through all the different ages your kids grow. And then there's a new you, right? Who gets called into being. You're married, and that's again different from the first moment you get married to then decades later. And so what are you finding and who are you becoming?
Simple questions, right?
Just a
um,
morning coffee.
yeah. So, yeah, I think it's about seasons,
Mm,
right? And the season of 20s, you can even look at it as age. Is teenage is different than 20 age, is different than 30 age, and 40s and 50s. And I think being single versus being in partnership
yeah.
versus being married, having
And that's often
kids.
in flow too these days, right? People come sometimes
Right.
in and out of marriage and relationships.
Yeah. There's definitely no single traditional form anymore.
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, I could just speak for myself here. Time is so interesting and fascinating because I have the memories of being a child,
Hmm.
good, bad, things that I carry with me.
Yeah.
Carried that through my teens. Then, you know, went to therapy, tried to figure out more about myself. Why am I the way that I am? Why do I think the way that I think? Um, my insecurities, where do they come from? How do I improve that? All the things.
Yeah.
And then get married, have kids. And that season completely changed everything because it was no longer just about me and it
Hmm.
was no longer just about my story.
Yeah.
It was the story of my children and the questions that came from raising children.
Yeah.
How do I want to celebrate this holiday, for instance? What is this holiday really about? I remember for Easter, my wife and I were talking about it for their first Easter. Okay, we're I think we're gonna hide eggs. Are we gonna give gifts? What are the gifts really for?
Mm-hmm.
Are we gonna do a? Are we saying that this is from the Easter bunny? And what? Why is there an Easter bunny? Because bunnies don't lay eggs. So what's right? Just
Right. What is
asking
the
all of
meaning
these.
behind all of this? And what are we instilling to this next generation? And yeah.
Yeah, all of these questions. So that's what I mean about seasons. And so, having kids and as they get older, I'm sure you found this too. I have to update
Yeah.
who I see in front of me
Yeah.
because I have two girls. The two little girls that I once had are no longer little girls
No.
anymore. They're not
No.
running around just happy go lucky every 2 seconds, dancing and spinning and
Yeah.
playing with scarves. They're into something new.
Yeah.
So, how do I see the version who they are now in front of me which means I have to see the version of me
Right.
that
You have to update
exists.
yourself to meet the changing needs of these little beings.
Yes. And I think that is the trickiest part of growing,
Yeah.
evolving, is we change daily,
Yeah.
right? I mean, who I was a few days ago is actually pretty different than who I am today. I've
Yeah.
already seen changes just in a few days.
Yeah. Which I think is so courageous when we can actually recognize that we are constantly changing. I mean, even our cells are regenerating and
Mhm.
right that we are not the same. If we let ourselves not be the same, then I think we actually can grow and meet the current challenges and needs. But I think, I don't know, I'm curious your perspective because it seems like if we stay more rigid and this is who I am, I think that's where things get harder.
I think you're right. That staking the claim of this is who I am doesn't allow for learning and growth and change.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets confusing, right? Because at some point, whether one has done self work, we try and get to a point to own
To
that. Like,
know, right?
this is who I am.
Yeah.
I am this or I am that. And I mean, even the I am statements in the spiritual community that's become so powerful, which I love, by the way,
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
But then you are becoming rigid and it doesn't allow for anything new to happen. And again, like we said, who I am or who you are a few days ago is probably different than who you are now. Certainly different than a few years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah. So do you feel like one of the seasons is kind of knowing who you are, like you said, going to therapy, understanding your insecurities, where does this all come from? I'm thinking that another season is more of the letting go of who I think myself to be. Um,
Yeah, exactly. Like seasons in our year.
yeah,
Think of it like a tree, right? You bloom this tree, you look at the tree and you say, oh my gosh, there's new leaves, it's springing forth, it's green, it's beautiful. And then during the summer months, you see the tree. And then in fall, the tree starts to change color and
yeah,
it loses its leaves.
yeah.
And then it's bare
Hearing
for a
it's
while.
dying.
Yeah, it's letting go.
Yeah.
And there is a constant birth and rebirth that is happening. Like you said, cells are dying off and regenerating all the time. And we are too. But it can be scary.
Yeah, it leads me to a thought that I've had conversations with men around how you can be on the surface or in your life or every day, kind of going about things and things are fine and things are good. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there can be that feeling of death or hopelessness, or is this all there is? And I think as it gets more complex as we get older, from what I'm seeing coaching men, like that becomes more prevalent and harder to ignore. And I'm curious if you've had that experience or your clients have had that experience and what you do with that.
Absolutely. I think one of the fantastic benefits of aging is getting to a point you hear traditionally midlife crisis. That's a term that has gotten so coined. Really, what I think it is, it could be a midlife awakening.
Yeah.
It's the questions that you ask,
Yeah.
right? I mean, this is why the podcast that I'm doing, Oldish, the idea is sort of this, like, it's not about the age, but it's about asking these questions,
Yeah.
right? Who am I? Where am I? Am I happy? Am I doing all that I can do? Do I have any dreams that are left? Have I become complacent?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's the time of life traditionally, right? I think
Yeah.
the younger generation is asking these questions earlier,
Earlier.
but really it's that time where you get to an age where you start looking at, I only have You start to meet your mortality and you say,
Yeah.
I only have a certain amount of time left. It's not infinite. I'm not indestructible. I can
Yeah.
start to feel things shifting and changing in my body. I certainly see it from the outside.
Yeah.
How do I want to spend my time? What do I want to do? What's important? And that is a beautiful, wonderful time
Yeah.
to go within and explore and, talk to a coach or, speak with a professional to really figure some of this stuff out, because that's when doors really open.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's an opportunity, right? Instead of midlife crisis, I've heard so many funny ways of saying midlife breakthrough, midlife awakening, midlife opportunity. I think about the saying where sometimes something comes up and I'm like, oh, great, another fucking growth opportunity. Or, you know,
Right.
I love growing and I love the opportunities. And in some moments it's a lot. It's like really another one and another one and another one. Um, but I do love that sense of, okay, it doesn't have to be a crisis. I think it's a crisis when we are in denial or when we're not really being honest, right? We're not being honest with ourselves or honest with the people around us.
I agree with you. It's so funny. Like, oh, here's another opportunity. Let's wrap this in a bow and feel good about what's happening. But here's the thing, too. Some people respond to crises. If you want to talk about how men are kind of portrayed, I don't think this is a blanket statement, but a lot of men, from what I see, hear,
Yeah.
talk to, we are fixers. Like, we
Mm,
do want to just find a solution, right? Like,
yeah.
hey, what do we need to do? Like, instead of sitting in process for, weeks, what do I need to do? What do you need to do? How do I fix it?
Yeah.
Right? A screw's loose. Let me go.
Let me
Let me
fix
go
it.
fix that.
Yeah.
So I think crisis works for some people
Interesting.
because you hear the word crisis and you go, okay, I need to do something about this.
Right.
It inspires action.
Yeah.
For some people, crisis makes them freeze. It's overwhelming. And not every man is good in crisis.
Yeah.
So I think it helps to have these other ways of looking at it instead of feeling so out of control and feeling, oh, I'm really at a terrible point here. Those questions that come in, that come up, are are an opening
Yeah.
for something new, but the
Yeah.
new is scary because Shayna, by way of asking those questions, you have to answer those questions.
Yeah.
And those answers are sometimes frightening.
Shocking,
Is this the
frightening,
relationship?
disorienting, right? Is
Yeah.
this the
Is
relationship I want
this
to
the
be in?
relationship that I want to be in?
Yeah.
How would it be if I was out of this and leaving my kids? It's the last thing that I want to do. And I don't want to switch to this co-parenting, but I'm really unhappy, right? These questions, my job, can I start over? I'm
Right.
unhappy doing what I'm doing, and it's time for something new, but I don't know what that is. I don't know how to go about it. I don't even know if I feel qualified. I don't know if I have the energy to do it.
Yeah.
And that part's scary.
Yeah. I 100% agree. And when you look under the surface or under the hood and you see, oh my God, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it to the next stoplight. Right. And I look at my parents, I think about my parents who are not introspective and I see their suffering too, though, right? It's like I think I've come to see that they're suffering either way. I mean, it's not easy either way.
Hmm.
The Buddha said life is suffering. And at first, I think in my 20s, in that season, I was like, no, it's not. We can. And then, but I promised that I was never going to become a jaded older human. And now I fight with the jaded parts, like, or I acknowledge that there are some parts that are jaded, and I'm committed to not just sinking into that, but I also have to acknowledge that some of those darker parts are there. And I think that can be hard for men, especially too, especially if there's no community around or nobody you're talking to where that's normalized. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I, this is why men's groups have become so popular is because men, just like women, need a place to process,
Yeah.
and they need a safe place to process.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to know if you hear this a lot, but um, a lot of times in relationship, however that looks,
Yeah.
if someone isn't good at processing or they're a slow processor, they're just not as skilled at
Yeah.
it. It's not
Yeah.
a trained thing. It doesn't come naturally. Processing can feel very hard and it can feel very vulnerable. And
Yeah.
if that man who used to be a boy didn't feel safe to process
Right. Wasn't
because their
held and
feelings got
supported.
shut down,
Mhm.
right? Or they were told to just be tough or just be a man or stop crying. These are the messages
Yeah.
that are given, and it becomes very confusing because this is the coding
Yeah.
that gets programmed in. And then we wonder why it's hard to be able to share emotion or be vulnerable. But you have to look at the original coding that got programmed in the
Totally.
first place.
Totally. So what are you seeing and experiencing as more of like, I don't know, we could call it a modern masculinity, because I do feel like, right, that coding for many of us, especially in this generation in our 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, probably even, right? That coding was there of this is how man is, kind of more
Hmm.
gruff and not processing. And, but, we were talking a little bit before we started recording. It's like, oftentimes, especially in heterosexual relationships, men are asked to be strong and powerful and provide and also help out and also be emotionally connected and right, like, and I think a lot of men find that overwhelming, that there are all these parts now that they're, or all these roles that they're asked to play.
I'm sure that it's confusing for all sexes, right? Again, in this modern day, it's like there's so much information that
Yeah.
you go on social media and it's like the sacred feminine and how to be the sacred feminine. And then you feel bad if you're not the sacred feminine. And then you're like, well, where do I exist within that? And then there's the masculine and it's, you know, the feminine needs to be held by the masculine, or the feminine masculine has to then be held by the masculine. You're like, I don't know what I am. I don't know who I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting the messages that, go away from alpha because the world doesn't need more alpha and more strength and more. But then again, you also get messages that, again, heterosexually, it's like women want the strong man and they want the strong, decisive, because then they're allowed to be in their sacred feminine. So, what I find a lot of the times, again, it's not all, is that men are going, okay, wait a second, their heads are spinning.
Yeah, their heads are spinning.
You want me to be able to be emotional and access my emotions and be able to process with you and sit with you, but then you also kind of want me to maybe like at times throw you up against the wall and have
Ravish
you
you
sort of
and right.
like ravish you and be this strong man, but then you also want things a certain way, so you're very particular. It's like it's so confusing.
Yeah.
And here's where I kind of wish there was less information
Mm.
and just more sharing,
Okay.
because you have all of these people who are staking claim in their expertise
Yeah.
of what the feminine is, of what the masculine is. Some of those are beautiful, Shayna. Like, I love hearing that. But also, when it's like diet.
Yeah.
Don't eat meat. Only eat meat.
I know.
Vegetables will save your life and they'll also kill you.
Right.
What are you supposed to do with all of that?
Yeah. It's
So,
in some ways it's a beautiful, I want to hear more. It's a beautiful opportunity to look and really get to know yourself, right? When I put a vegetable in my mouth, what do I actually notice in my body? When I eat meat, what happens for me, right? Because there's so much information, I think in some ways it causes us to have to look deeper into ourselves. But right, like how do you support the men you work with to filter out all of that noise and all that information and get to know who they are? And beyond the shame or that man box, that sense of this is who men are supposed to be.
I think there's so much shame around men, masculinity on so many sides of the spectrum,
Yeah.
right? Being too much of this or not enough of this. I mean, a lot of the work that I did with people early on, I had a course called The Sensitive Path to Success, and it was
Mm.
all around empaths. And it was, excuse me, it was amazing to hear so many people, because back then the term empath wasn't as popular as it is today.
Yep.
To hear so many men say, I was always really sensitive,
Yep.
and I feel that people made fun of me for it.
Yep.
So here is a quality. Like, I don't know about you. I want more sensitive men in the world.
Oh
I
yeah.
want more empathy in the world.
Yeah.
Women, men, any pronoun you
Right.
want
I
to
need
throw
people of
out
all
there,
genders, sensitivity,
more.
attunement, that capacity to
Yes.
feel others. And
Yeah. What
yeah.
worries me are the people who don't have empathy, the people who don't have that wiring.
Yeah.
That's where the problem lies. So you have men who might be more sensitive or emotional, then are made fun of, and so they stuff that deep, trying to be something different
Yes.
as opposed to allowing them to be who they are. And if there's something that they want to grow into, because you asked the question, how do you work with men to find this sense of self? I mean, self-awareness is huge. So it's not fitting anyone else's definition. It's looking at, who do you most want to become? Because
That's a great question.
your role might not be the extreme alpha. And
Yeah.
if you're comparing to someone who is the extreme alpha, but your work in the world, your mission is to do something totally in a different direction, you're swimming upstream and trying to become something that you're not even supposed to be.
Right. Right. And I think about that, how challenging it can be to compare yourself to the norm, the cultural norm, to that alpha, and like what the courage it takes to really stand up and say, this is who I am. These are the qualities I have, right? I am a sensitive human, maybe man. Um, yeah, it takes so much strength to do that.
And you see that right there, to me, embodies the powerful masculine.
Yes, agreed.
It's being okay with who you are. It's
Yeah,
it's it's owning yourself in all the best ways,
yeah.
without shame or guilt or apology, and just saying, I love myself. This is who I am, and I hold
Mm,
space for you to be who you are. I'm open to listening. If there's something that I'm doing
yep.
that is causing hurt or pain, let me look at that.
Yeah,
But I'm okay with who I am. To me, that's strength and power.
yeah. Yeah, and it feels like that middle path too, right? I don't have to, if someone brings something to me that was hurtful, I don't have to collapse into this shame spiral of, oh God, what's wrong with me? I'm bad, I'm wrong, and then don't have to defend either and prove, well, that's not who I am, and that's not me, and you're whatever overreacting, right? That middle place of, I actually know me, and I trust me, and approve of me, and then can meet the world without all of that tension.
Yeah, totally. And there's an energy to that,
Mm,
right? As you were talking and saying all that, what I was feeling is a real openness. It's not defensive. It's not armoring up. It's not, well, this is who I am. And if you don't like it, then you can fuck
right.
off,
Right.
right? It's really a gentle, calm power of, hey, I'm okay with these parts of self.
Yeah.
I've been through a lot. I've experienced hurt, pain, trauma. I'm sure you have experienced hurt, pain, trauma. And I'm open to bringing all of that to the table, but without shame or apology of who I am or how I am.
Mhm. Mhm. And what do you find? I know in my life that makes intimacy possible, and that makes, whether it's in a friendship or in a romantic relationship, right? There's this depth of connection that makes possible, and also a kind of vitality
Mhm.
of, being able to be alive or feel gratitude, feel joy. So I'm curious, like, what do you see, that makes possible for your clients or for you?
I think anytime someone can love themselves more and accept themselves more, they are able to be more comfortable in social situations.
Yeah.
They're able to have less mental chatter in social situations. Now you look at intimate situations and relationships. I think the more you love yourself, the more okay you are with yourself, the easier it is to experience intimacy. And
Yeah.
I don't just mean sexual, but I mean um, vulnerability and sharing with someone else, letting someone else in.
Yeah.
And that can be scary for so many people because it is really vulnerable. I think that's what I hear the most is um, sharing one's self with someone else and bracing for how that's going to be taken.
Yeah.
Will they be judged? Will they be ousted? Will they be thought less of? And that
Yes.
is one of the scariest things as a human being. It goes back to primal
Primal
being kicked
belonging
out.
and, right, being kicked out of the tribe. And yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I often comment that I hear men say, "Oh, I'll jump out of a helicopter. I'll, whitewater
Right.
kayak, but please don't ask me to open and reveal in that way, and that I could be rejected or I could be ousted."
Isn't that funny? Like, I will jump out of a helicopter. I will do these insane, thrill seeking, scary things.
Yeah.
But opening up to someone feels scarier
Mhm.
and more threatening
Mhm.
than actually a life threatening situation.
Yep.
One is not life threatening, one is,
Yeah.
but that is the piece that gets interpreted in the brain. And I think it's important for couples to know this. It's important for people to know that if someone is scared of opening up, you have to look at that, or please look at that. You don't have to do anything. Please look at that and understand that person is fearing for their lives in that moment. That is literally what it feels like,
Mhm.
that they could possibly be rejected by you. And look, this goes back to early on, right? Being rejected by a parent, or, I have to do something in just the right way. Otherwise, you're going to withhold your love. You're going to remove your love.
Yeah.
You're going to remove your attention. And to a little child, that literally feels like you are going to
To
die, like
die.
your sustenance is going to be cut off.
Yeah.
It's good to understand that, because I hear a lot of times partners say, he just won't open up,
Yeah.
right? And by the way, I hear this um, in all forms of relationship. One partner usually has a harder time opening up than the
Yeah.
other. And there's a lack of understanding. They're just frustrated that they're not opening up or they're not
Right.
sharing without fully understanding why that is so hard for someone, how scary that actually is.
Right. And it's like they're taking it as a rejection, and then their hackles are raised, and then they go into their survival response. And then it's just two survival responses kind of battling it
Right.
out.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. What have we not covered? I know we could probably talk about this for
It's
days.
funny. I thought of something.
Yeah.
I think, I guess we're going to go there, but
Okay.
I think sexually too,
Yeah.
right? There's this, you look at men in performance,
Yeah.
and I have heard many men say, I'd actually rather even not do it.
Rather
even if
not have
it's,
sex.
I would rather not have sex if I feel that I'm going to be rejected,
Uh-huh.
not please, or be inadequate in some way. If I can't get, the hardest erection I possibly could, or
Yeah.
I'm worried about that, or I'm worried that I'm not going to last as long. I, maybe it's a new situation, maybe it's someone that you've wanted to be with. It is it's almost easier not to even go into that situation
Right.
than it is to be in the situation and fail in some way.
Yeah. Right. Because it feels like failure as opposed to, I mean, it's interesting in my current relationship in the beginning, we were both having all kinds of, bodily issues and sex was harder in the beginning or like, typical penetrative sex was harder. And it created so much intimacy, I think because we were both willing to be vulnerable with it.
Mm,
But I think so many men have not had that experience that they could open up and be vulnerable and that someone would actually be there to meet them and say, wow, thank you so much. I feel closer to you. Okay, let's work this out together. Let's explore this together, right? And it just reminds me of how shallow our society can be. That it's so much about getting off and right? Like just that physical pleasure versus all the other things. I mean, in my book, Honest Sex, I wrote about four-dimensional sex versus one-dimensional sex, right? The
ooh, what
one-dimensional
is
being like
four-dimensional sex?
four-dimensional sex is the not only the physical one dimension, but you've got the physical, the emotional, the energetic, the relational, right? All of those happening at the same time. You're aware of your own experience. You're also aware of your partner's experience. They get to merge, right? That's like
Mhm.
all of these dimensions that make sex so much beyond the physical. But I think men and women and people of all genders haven't necessarily been taught how to experience that. And so then there's so much fear and rejection and, the sense of I'm a man if I climax and I have to go this long and this hard. And it's just so painful.
It is so painful, and I think most men have probably been taught through porn,
Oh,
and then it gets reinforced when they hear women or other men talking about size. Then there's comparison.
yeah,
Then, there's some ridicule that if it's not a certain size or it's not a certain length of time that you perform for, and then they have this idea or ideal of what it should be.
yeah,
And I will say the worst place you could possibly be in a sexual experience is in your head. It
right.
is the worst. It just, there's not pleasure
No,
in it.
no.
It takes away the pleasure and it takes away the intimacy. And I wish that more people could hear your message. Please, everyone, read your book. What is it? Honest Sex?
Honest sex. Yeah.
Because fourth dimensional sex is, I think, where it's at, right? You have all these different bodies, the emotional, the physical, the energetic. And while everyone might not connect to that or understand what that is, there is so much more that's happening than just physical. And I think if it's just on the physical plane, it's limited, because
Yeah.
I hear people who talk about sex more as this spiritual experience,
Mhm.
and the way that it's described, it's like a when Harry met Sally moment. I feel like everyone would raise their hand in the room and
Right.
go, I,
Yes.
I want
All of
that,
that.
because that feels safe. It
Yeah.
feels good. It feels connective. And
Yeah.
it feels like I can grow through it. I can expand myself. I can expand with my partner.
Yeah.
Just physical alone is limited
Yeah. Yeah. And usually not as satisfying.
and not as satisfying.
So maybe I love this, your new podcast, Oldish, right? It's like, okay, how do we update our sexual selves, our intimate selves, our vulnerable selves? And so I love that you're covering that and really supporting people to look at how do we get older we're not old necessarily, but right, how do we be in this oldish phase and actually use it to grow and become more of who we are as opposed to just fade into that jaded, complacent, right, self that we could fall into.
Yeah, Shayna, it's so interesting, the definition of words and the association through our definitions. And
Yeah.
this is right on point with what we're talking about, updating. I have this little game that I've played with people where we'll say a word and we'll redefine the word just as a
Mm,
game.
yeah.
Like, what's your relationship to that word? What if we redefine that word? And through coaching, right? Our definitions create the scaffolding and structure of what we see
Yeah.
through word. So, oldish, we were all laughing because it sounded so fitting. We love the title, but there was a part of me is like, oh, but do we really want to claim oldish? Because for so long, again, spiritually, it's like stay young, say
Uh-huh.
that you're young, say that you're young. Don't associate with old.
Getting old.
But as I've been thinking about this and redefining it for myself, that look, old-ish isn't really about a number. It's not like, oh, I'm 70, so I'm oldish. I'm like, I want to change the conversation of embracing what it means to age.
Yeah.
Like, do all the things that you want to do to feel younger, exercise, keep your body supple, be in shape. Try to strive for longevity if that fits for you. But we also have to, in my opinion, we have to embrace the wisdom that comes
Yeah.
with getting older,
Getting
the
older.
the experience that we have had up until now, because that counts for something.
Yeah.
And so I just think sort of redefining the word older or old or
Or
oldish,
oldish.
like, what do you want that to mean? Because oldish could be your golden age. This
Totally.
could be what you've been waiting for to grow into. Like, I'm getting oldish in the way that is so beautiful for you, of you're stepping into yourself, you're stepping into a newer version of yourself, you're upgrading yourself, you are exploring yourself emotionally, mentally, sexually. You're asking these questions. And I
Yes.
think that is a fun thing to play with,
I
is
love it.
redefining what it means.
Redefining. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation and for doing your work and your podcast and for being a human and a man who is, unearthing and consciously growing and supporting others to do the same. I appreciate you.
Thank you,
Um,
Shayna. Thank you for doing what you do, and writing and speaking and coaching and sharing, because I think it's really important, um, that I know, your main focus is men, but I think this applies to women too. And,
yeah,
I think everyone can grow in the areas that we've been discussing today, because it goes back to self-acceptance, self-love, and really through all of your work that I've seen and read so far, that's really what you're teaching at the core. It's
yeah,
just the mechanisms of how to get there.
yes, exactly, exactly. Any last thing you want to leave people with before you let them know how to find you?
Thanks for listening and being open to this conversation. I think it's important to just keep opening to new ways of being, and hopefully that can be exciting.
Yeah, awesome. And where can people find more of you?
You can go to my website, randyspelling.com, or I am pretty active on social media. My Instagram is Randy Spelling. Interact with me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shayna.